Welcome, everyone, to the Best Damn Podcast. I am your host, John Keene. As always, I would like to thank you guys for joining me. Ask that you please add, follow, and subscribe. And remember, check us out, www.spreaker.com/user/Best Damn Podcast. Also, if you're watching here on YouTube, make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe, and click that bell. And please support the channel, www.paypal.me/Best Damn Podcast. Tonight, guys, I am very excited. One of my favorites here, probably my absolute favorite when it comes to authors and connoisseurs of the Bible. Mr. Gary Wayne has joined the show once again to school us on Illuminati bloodlines, Gnosticism. We're going to talk about a little bit about everything. I want to welcome you, Gary, and just thank you for taking the time tonight to join us.
Well, thank you for having me back, and very much looking forward to some of the interesting topics you've got lined up for tonight. I think if that doesn't get the audience going and the chat room exploding with questions, then I'm not sure what will, because that is just something that is a rabbit hole that is it's a very serious topic, but it's also fun to go down and talk about, I think. So, and bring out some real information and connect some dots so that people have a better concept of what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And, Gary has been on the show before, and, most of you guys, you know them when it comes to, overall biblical knowledge and even text and, scripture that is not within the Holy Bible. He is very good at connecting these dots, bringing them all back to the true biblical principles. And I think that there's right now that has compiled such a detailed and vast amount of research like you have in your book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and have brought it to the masses and have been so generous as far as making appearances and speaking to people and just sharing this knowledge, sharing your wisdom that absolutely comes from God. So I just want to say thank you, man, and you're much appreciated. So
well, thank you. Very, very generous and kind remarks.
Man, I mean everyone. That's why I always try to, have you back. Gary, I kind of want to just lead off with a general question to kind of lead us in the direction of what you consider important when it comes to bloodlines. Now, your research refers to the Nephilim quite a bit. So can you give us a description of who are the Nephilim and where they come from and what is their role with humanity and God?
Okay, well, that's a big subject, so I'll try and keep it as condensed as possible. I could do a whole show just on that, but it's a great question, and most people, when I start talking about that, you're going to appreciate why it's such a great question. The audience is really going to appreciate that question, I think. So the Nephilim are a group of giants that are created in the book of Genesis 6, 1 through verses 4. And it's when the sons of God, which are the angels, who are the rebellious angels and who are the watchers in the first book of Enoch and other apocryphal texts that are out there, go to the daughters of men, and the daughters of Cain in this case, and they produce the giants. And the King James Version Bible, when it says giants, you take that back to Hebrew, and it's going to be the word Nephil, which is where Nephilim comes from, and the I-M is the male plural. And they were a tribe of giants, and they were the demigods, and they were the same as the titans, let's say, produced by Poseidon, as in Atlas would be the most famous out of the 10 kings that he produces in Atlantis, or Hercules, that is the son of Zeus. It's the same type of being as what is being created by that second tier of gods in the pantheon. And they all go to human females, and in the Poseidon case, it's Clymene and Clydo, depending on whether or not you're reading the version on Iapetus or Poseidon, and they are the same god. So just to give some people a connection, and these are the giants that are known all over the world. Whether or not it is the Anunnaki that comes out of Sumeria, whether or not it's the the Miocene out of China, or the Asuras, and there's several different names in the subcontinent of India. So these are the giants that are known all over the world, and they're created exactly the same way. And so what happens in the Bible with these giants is that they rebel, just as they do in all of the accountings around the world. In the Bible, they rebel against God. In other accounts, they rebel against the pantheon of gods. And so this causes the flood. And in Genesis 6, that is actually the beginning to the flood story narratives that go through chapters 6 and 7 and into 8. And so what's interesting is the Nephilim story is in the preamble to the flood. So they're the ones that have a significant impact for what brings on the flood. And so what happens with the Nephilim, and this happens in about the 6th generation after Adam, in the time of Jared and in the days of Noah, is that they unite with the mystical religions that Enoch, son of Cain, has created, and the secret societies and the mystery schools, which also come out of these 7 sciences that is being developed. And that's going to partner with the Nephilim, the rebellious fallen angels, and they're going to create this alliance that's going to dominate the antediluvian world, but they turn evil according to the polytheist accounts after a time. Whether or not they were ever good, I don't know, but in the other accounts, they were good in the beginning, and then they turn evil. But nonetheless, they end up in rebellion and absolutely enslaving and destroying humankind in their wake. So not only do they turn on humans, the whole planet, but they also turn on themselves with their wars. And thus comes the flood. And so when you take control of the antediluvian world, you take control of the government, you take control of the kingships and the dynasties. And so these organizations, this religion, and somehow the giants cross the flood. So you get the same organizational structure beginning after the flood that you had before the flood. And whether or not giants survive the flood, they escape out of Tartarus, as in some of the Gnostic and Greek mythologies, or there's a second incursion, just as in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you're going to have Utnapishtim or Ziusudra, depending which transliteration that you're getting, survives on an ark with his whole family, and he's an archetypical Nephilim. He's 2/3 god and 1/3 human. And or who's telling the story, or who the epic is named after, which is Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu or Enkidu, again, depending on the transliteration of the translation that you're reading. They're also 2/3 god and 1/3 human, and created after the flood. So somehow, some way, giants survive the flood, and they do in the Bible as well. And in all accounts, again, they usurp the kingships after the flood as well. So from even at Babel, you see in the Bible, you have Nimrod who's partnering with Hermes, who brings these sciences, and they start this Babel religion and using the 7 sciences, and they build Babel City and Babel Tower as the first manifestation of this knowledge that was given to them in the antediluvian world, and then added to by the fallen angels and or the gods. Right, so this is the knowledge that Hermes finds because he finds the 2 pillars of Lamech, where it has the directions where the knowledge is stored. I'm going down a rabbit hole I don't need to go down to. So shortening the story, so they usurp they usurp the dynasties, and all the kingship dynasties. And so when they're going to start a new dynasty and take over another dynasty, they're going to match up the most purest of the matriarchal Nephilim bloodline with a male bloodline, but it's the matriarchs that are going to start the bloodlines or the new kingships. It's very, very important, the female aspect in polytheism and with the kingships. And these are the dynasties that pop up in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, with the Hittites, the Amalekim, and then spreads to the rest of the world. And so all of the dynasties in the world come from these bloodlines, the royal bloodlines. And this is the noble and elite class that has set up that infrastructure all throughout history, and it kept non-pure bloods or with that bloodline in their genealogies from gaining wealth. And so we would have seen that replicated in the West that we would know as the feudal system, right? Where you had all the kings and the nobles, and they're all related by their bloodlines, who are overseeing and basically enslaving humankind in poverty and not educating them or anything like that. And so it's these dynasties that come down through history that continue to maintain that power, which is very, very important. And they intermarried all the way through. So that if you were, let's say you were Akhenaten in Egypt, you would get wives from Mesopotamia, maybe from the Mitanni dynasty of that time, so that you could introduce some different kind of the same blood and try not to dilute it, but at the same time they had to worry about blood diseases. And as it comes down through history, they've had to use more and more lower pure bloodlines on the outer levels of the nobility to intermarry, so that you don't get like Habsburg disease or Habsburg jaw and hemophiliac diseases, and all these diseases that are known with the blood are basically from too much intermarriage, which is again a significant disease of the royal bloodlines that they have to be very, very careful with. And along with this organizational structure of controlling the governments, they bring along the mystical religions and their priests with them, and they develop with the mystery schools and the sciences to go along with it. And they're worshiping the same pantheon of gods that were worshipped before the flood. And they're still trying to enslave humankind all the way through history, and will do so right through to the end time, because we're like cattle to them, because we're inferior. So it's these bloodlines that are very, very important to the secret societies, which they also formed, which comes out of the mystery schools, and out of the, the fifth science is called geometry, but in the craft they call it masonry. So it's where the Masons get their name, is from the fifth science. And so this organizational structure that has come down through history is still in place today. And the only thing that's really sort of pushing them back is Christianity, because otherwise they'd had essentially get a monopoly on the whole world. Although I know there's Islam out there, and that's a different sort of dynamic. But from the Western ends of these bloodlines, it's the Christian opposition that they're most concerned with. They feel that they can control Islam, whether they can or they can't. I'll leave that up to them, but they think that they can. And within this cult, this culture, you have a pedigree that defines the hierarchy. So the purer the bloodline, with the pedigree and the genealogies to substantiate that, the higher you're going to be up in the organization. And same with the secret societies, so that you can be asked to come into Freemasonry, and you may not have any of these bloodlines, but you have to be invited. You just can't join. But by the time you become past adept, you're going to not only swear allegiance to this knowledge and to this system, but as you get up higher to, let's say, the Rosicrucians, that becomes the intersection of secret societies to the bloodlines. And the upper 50% of the Rosicrucians are going to be purebloods. And then there's a few more organizations up there, but to give the understanding as to how that sort of works with pedigree and the organizations, and the same with the religions, because the priesthoods in these religions have their own bloodlines as well. And they're all part of the nobility as well. So it's the same sort of ideology and understanding. So the Rosicrucians, the top 50% are purebloods, representing the 13 Western families. European families for the most part. There's more families and bloodlines around the world. But above the Rosicrucians is the Committee of 300, and these are all purebloods, representatives of families. And then you move up to the Council of 33, which again is all purebloods, and then to the 13 families of the West. But this is that's just the West in that sort of organizational structure.
All right. Now, can I ask you, has this had a connection in time to the Aryan race or the Rh negative bloodlines?
Yeah, so lots of interesting things in there. So let's deal with the Aryan race first, which will feed into the Rh negative that you're asking about. So the Aryans are a group of people that nobody knows where they come from after the flood, at least from secular sort of standards in terms of how they're portraying it. They seem to be a very ancient race. But when you get into the religions and the history of the polytheist religions, particularly around the Mediterranean, they tend to take them back to Atlantis, right?
Oh,
which
okay.
Poseidon started. And in Atlantis, you had two distinct sort of branches of the Nephilim, and I'm sure there's different kinds of branches around the world, but you had the red-haired, pale-skinned, hairy, hazel-eyed ones, which vampires and the dragon allegory for the bloodline is based on, with Vlad the Impaler. Another rabbit hole I won't go down right now. But I will say that Prince Charles is on record of taking his genealogies back to Vlad III, to Vlad II, and back to Scythia, where polytheist religions and mythology say that the Titans escaped out of Tartarus, which was in Scythia. So there's an interesting relationship there. Back on track, though, you have the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans that were the other part of the Atlantean branch of Nephilim. And after the flood and before the flood, they're also known in the fairy mythology, which is the same type of religions, just a sort of a branch there of the fairy religion. You have them known as the Tuatha Danann.
Okay.
So the Tuatha Danann, everybody would be familiar with these ones as the fairy people, the fairy kings, which produce down the line like King Arthur of the Grail romances and genealogies that they have mixed in there. These are the red-haired, hazel-eyed ones, right? And and so the blonde-haired, blue-eyed ones are also Tuatha Danann, and they went up the Danube, up into Russia, up into the Ukraine, up into Germany, and up into Norway and Sweden. And that's where that blonde-haired German sort of Aryan ideology, which they call Völkisch ideology, which was overlaid on the real ideology I'll come back to, where that comes from. And so these were Nephilim bloodlines. These were bloodlines going back to the Nephilim and then to the gods that created them. And so now when we roll that forward to how does that connect to the Rh negative aspect in terms of who the Aryans are. And of course, let me backstep just a quick one here to bring back into context. You have Aryans in North America, which are a secret society. They're the Nazis. That's National Socialism. So I know they're defined as right-wing, but they're actually left-wing. Just as Hitler was in National Socialism. Most people don't understand that. So when anarchists are attacking Nazis, it's two left-wing parties in a civil war. So one's as evil as the other one. It's I don't do a distinction between evil. No. But anyways, getting back on track, the Rh negative bloodline is, and there's 4 different sort of groupings of blood, and you have a positive and you have a negative, and you're basically an Rh negative. You're just missing the Rh factor of that component. But what we don't know is where the Rh negative comes from. What we do know is it's inserted into the bloodlines at some point in time into human bloodlines, but nobody knows exactly when or from where, right? And so in my book, I don't specifically reference the Rh negative because of that. And I just talk about bloodlines, and the real aspect, which I'll come to in a second. Okay. Now, with the Rh negative bloodline, that tends to be a common trait of the royal family, though. So like the Windsors out of England are generally O negative. And of course, until recently, you couldn't have positive mating with negative bloodlines because the baby would die. And although type O can sort of cross over to all bloodlines, but until recently, that was just something that just sort of wasn't done, and that's why people had to know who they could marry and not marry, because otherwise you couldn't reproduce. But what the royals and the people of the bloodline say is that they believe that that bloodline goes back to the demigods, to the fallen angels, or to the gods. And so they view that as important. So it's important to understand that. I also want to say for the record that if anybody does have any Rh negative blood, that has nothing to do with salvation. That's a physical aspect. So it doesn't matter whether or not you have DNA of Nephilim or Rh negative bloodline or whatever. It's your faith in Jesus and God that counts. And his sacrifice can overcome any sin in the world except the sin against the Holy Spirit. So I'm not saying that people who have Rh negative bloodlines are condemned in any way. So let's be clear on that.
I hope not. I have it.
So no worries there. It's just a physical attribute. Now, where this sort of marries up with the Nazis and Vril, Vril is a Rosicrucian concept. And again, that should come as no surprise because it's the pedigree that they're talking about, right? And the top 50% are purebloods of the Rosicrucians. So it makes sense it would come from Rosicrucian ideology. And so this is what they believe is the bloodline that goes back to Atlantis. Okay, at least back to prehistory, because there's all sorts of different kinds of civilizations in prehistory and probably several different branches and coming out of those civilizations. And so they believe it's something in the blood that has the ability to help people evolve into demigods again, or the Nephilim, just as they were in the past. And that's part of the concept of the pathway to God is how do they re-engineer what's in the blood by keeping it pure and releasing its properties to give them the size and the godlike abilities to live forever in the physical world as a god. And this is the ideology that the Nazis overlaid on their Völkisch ideology. And in their case, it became and Grail ideology was also overlaid in their culture and their belief system. If people don't think that they didn't have their own church, they did. In fact, Hitler had it up and running as called the Reichschurch, which was in 1933. And of course, Jesus was not Jewish in that church, and he was not a divine individual. He was just a prophet. And that he had blonde hair and blue eyes. So, I mean, they recreated him in their own sort of religion. But they believed in something called Thule was where this race of giants came from. Okay. And Thule, just as Thule was a secret society and part of the organizational structure to create the Nazis of that time, was an ancient civilization. And if you analyze it, it is either a sister type of civilization to Atlantis, or they're talking about Atlantis. And so it comes out of the Norse ideology, or that Norse Tuatha De Danann, blonde hair, blue-eyed Aryan connection that I set out in front, just so that you can get sort of all of the different connections. And so what the Nazis were trying to do is two things. They were trying to figure out how to backwards engineer this Vril bloodline to become demigods. And going forward, they were also doing the pedigree aspect of making sure that blonde hair, blue-eyed males and females were intermarrying to ensure the purity of the race. And they're trying to create the new man concept. And the new man concept, which you'll hear a lot today again, is just that Gnostic term. It's the new Nephilim concept.
Wow.
That's all they're trying to create. So I know I covered a lot of territory there. Do you have some questions or...
I wanted to ask you, there's reference to the serpent seed and the serpent's root. Or is that what that's talking about? Is the Nephilim bloodline? Or could you kind of expand on that a little bit?
It's similar. Let's put it that way. And so it's another branch. And the serpent seed aspect is, for the most part, a Gnostic ideology, but there's a lot of Christians that also subscribe to the serpent seed. And I'm a bit agnostic as to whether or not it exists from a biblical perspective, because we don't have a smoking gun verse. I understand how people get that. And for people who don't know what the serpent seed is, it's the ideology that Satan went to Eve and bore a child by the name of Cain, and in some accounts Cain and Abel, depending on which Gnostic gospel that you're reading. And of course, we don't have that in the Bible. The only thing we have is in Genesis, where it clearly says that it's the son of Adam and Eve. But there's allegory that's used to arrive at that, in terms of when Eve is being deceived. People will take some of the language that goes back to Hebrew, and it'll have a possible meaning that of eating the fruit is like having sex, right? And, and that's where they link that in. But again, that's allegory, but it changes the narrative. And so people understand is I read the Bible literally. And it has to make sense with the narrative. You just can't jump in because Hebrew word's going to have some different meanings and say, well, I'm going to use that meaning. It still has to line up with the rest of the narrative. And if you can't make that work coming out of Hebrew, then it doesn't make any sense. So that's the serpent seed. And the Gnostics actually believe that. And the Targum, which is the Aramaic oral traditions coming out of Babylon from the Jews, which was taught to the Jewish people because they lost the ability to speak and write Hebrew, and only the Pharisees and the priests could speak Hebrew. Aramaic was the language, so they wrote it all, the Bible down with their commentaries in Aramaic, which is called the Talmud, or the Targum, I'm sorry. And this, in the Targum, they editorialized that Satan, or Samael in this case, as in Kabbalism, actually did have sex with Eve to create Adam. Now, Cain also has a few other variations in that serpent seed. There's other versions of the Gnostic Gospels where Eve is raped by several archons. And then you also have Lilith as being the mother of Cain as well. So it doesn't really matter to me. What they are doing is saying this is another Nephilim bloodline.
Okay.
Which is the whole point, right? But when you get further down to stream in some of the different kinds of Gnostic organizations that were so powerful and large at the time of Jesus and before, and up to, say, 200 years after the life of Jesus, you have these groups that are carrying through the Amaka Seth Gospels, right? And this is where the Christ consciousness aspect sort of comes through, where Amaka Seth is going to have incarnations. Not only his first incarnation is before the flood at Sodom or Gomorrah, or vice versa, and then again after the flood at the other city, where there's presumably a second creation of the Nephilim, and that there are more incarnations, and he will have an incarnation in the end time, where the enemies of Amaka Seth and their belief system are going to be trying to war with him and his followers. So this is just, again, the end time war of heaven and on earth, and Revelation 12 with the angels coming down, all of that sort of coming together with an avatar and effect on Antichrist, because I think he's going to be in that sort of Christ consciousness polytheist version as an incarnated Messiah, which has got nothing to do with Jesus, and we've covered that off on several shows. So people want to read up on that. You may want to read the Tablets of Seth, that'll have some of this in it, and also the Revelation of it's the Holy Book of the Invisible Spirit. So, testing my memory on that. So not sure, I went down a rabbit hole there, not sure where we started with that. But there's also a couple other groups in there called the Sethites. And there's also the Ophites, which was a serpent rooted word. But there were just sort of there was three main branches of Gnosticism at that time, I guess is what my point was.
Okay. Now, we know that the secret societies have you just explained, are directly connected to these bloodlines. When did, these societies kind of emerge, and did they originate out of the Knights Templar, and is there connections to the modern day Illuminati that you know of?
Yeah. I'll take that in a couple of parts. Again, very, very
Okay.
good question. The simple answer is yes and more. The bigger answer is the secret societies were originally created in the time of Enoch, son of Cain, and his descendants, and through to the time of Lamech and Jubal and Nama and Tubal-Cain. And that's actually where Freemasonry takes their beginning back to as well, with Jubal practicing Masonry, just as Nimrod was the first Grand Master of the Masons in their view, and wrote the first constitution after the flood, which is how we know he was using the sciences, at least according to what the Freemasons and the Gnostics believe. And so this is the beginning, and these organizations have been with us all throughout history, which is that part of that organizational structure that I was talking about. So roll that forward between the monastic orders coming out at the same time as we're talking about the Sethites and the Cainites and the Ophites and these other groups, is you had the Essenes, which were the first monastic order of this sort of global Gnosticism of the West, which is where the monastic orders come from in the Catholic Church. So again, this is where Gnostics hid during the Roman Church period, where all the persecution was going on in several factions and times, in either the monastic orders like the Benedictines and the Augustines and the Cistercians, and there's Calabrians, and there's many, many orders, but that's where they kind of hid for their own protection, kind of in plain sight. And within the Mason guilds, which was the Roman collegia that was building the churches.
Wow.
Right? So that's where they hid. And of course, that's that knowledge of Masonry comes down to from the mystery schools, from Pythagoras, that goes back. I won't go through all of that, but it all connects back, right? So this is the knowledge they used. And the church needed them to build the churches. And so these secret societies and these monastic orders and the Gnostic religion is driven underground in the West. And we see them resurfacing and coming together to reestablish new secret societies in 1090 to 1099 with the Knights Templar. So you have the Calabrian monks there, and de Bullion actually goes to the Calabrian monks in Italy before going over to the Middle East. And de Bullion is a descendant of the Merovingians. So he's not a poor monk. He's a son of a king out of the Lorraine region, as is the Payan, and as is Anjou, who produces the Plantagenet that the presidents like to link all other bloodlines back to. And so these are three key members, and all but two of the knights are all from noble bloodlines throughout mostly France, except for two, which are Benedictine knights. And of course, Saint Bernard, who is going to write the doctrine for the creation of the Knights Templar, is a Benedictine knight, and he's a nephew of one of the, I think of Montbard, is his uncle, who is another one of these royal bloodlines. So all of this is still working together, and they create two organizations. They create the Templars, which is the organization we see on the outside, and the Priory of Sion, which we most people don't see but have heard of, but are kind of debunked. And I can send people historical references to the Prior of Sion if people want it. Believe me, it was an organization. And it's recorded in Freemasonry and in a whole bunch of other different areas. And so it's the secret order that's the inside that's important, because that's where the Gnostic and the depths are. And there's a whole bunch of other priest monks that are sort of the mundane aspect. They may be rising in the system and learning the knowledge, but unless you're an adept, you're really nobody in that system. And so in 1188, there's some other groups that they form as well. I won't spend much time on it, but the Knights of St. John were formed a little bit before the Templars, and there's about 4 different major knight orders that are formed. And these are going to be the secret societies of that time sort of moving forward. In 1188, there's a falling out in the Templar society where the Priory of Sion is going to leave. Okay. And what has happened is in 1187, Jerusalem falls. All right. And so the inner order is accusing the rest of the order that they've lost their way. All right. That they're too interested in banking and money, and their number one priority was to protect Jerusalem and to further their pursuits of Thoth, as they would like to call it, and making sure they've got their kingships in control, and they're carrying out their larger schemes and plans. So they separate in 1188 at Gezer Castle at a ceremony called the Cutting of the Elms. And this is where that list of prior FCon grandmasters begins. And the reason why you don't have ones that are listed before is because those grandmasters were all Knights Templar grandmasters. So it actually goes back there and then further back as you go into the societies before that. So when the Knights Templars fall in 1307, the Priory's not protecting them. And of course, the wealth and everything scurries in 1,000 different directions and into some of the other Knight Orders and over to Scotland, which is important because that's where the Sinclairs are, whose name is St. Clair. And they take the name St. Clair after taking Normandy from the French, which are the Rollo, which are the Norse bloodlines, right, that we talked about with the Tuatha De Danann. And so they take the name St. Clair, which is the name of the treaty, which is Sinclair in Scotland, and they also take refugee Freemasons after the fall of, refugee Templars after the fall of the Templars, and they create a new organization called Freemasonry. So that's one of the organizations. So the Rosicrucians are formed right in 1188. This is the central core that leaves, right? These are the, and the purebloods that are, there's a bit of a civil war, and there's still grandmasters and the Templars that are going to be purebloods, but this is the core of the royal bloodlines that are really kind of leaving. And so the Rosicrucians are going to set up several different orders, and one of the ones that will relate back to what I was talking about earlier was in about 1400, they set up the Sarkani Rond, or the Ordo Draconis, to put the dragon kingships back on the throne. And of course, this is the organization that Zygmunt indoctrinates or inducts Vlad III into, who the Dracula, and Dracula is just means son of a dragon as you translate that. And is red-haired, hazel-eyed, pale, is that Tuatha De Danann type of Nephilim character that we're talking about, just as Nephilim drank blood and are the enemies of Christianity. It's all allegory reflecting their genealogies and their history. But they also say that we're not going to permit the Roman Church to take us down in one swoop again, because everything was centralized with the Templars, and they were so powerful. They were the most powerful organization in the world at that time, the richest organization at that time, and the most powerful military of that time. I mean, they were just, it was just something that we haven't seen, but we probably will see that type of thing rise as we get closer to the end time with the oligarchies that are being set up, same sort of ideology. And so they're going to set up other organizations. Freemasons is one of them. The Rothschilds with the banking arm is another one. Even though the Jesuits come along, and which is another one of the groups they're going to re-establish within the Roman Church. And of course, the Jesuits are going to get control of the banking system within the church. So now they've got control of the banking system within the Roman Church and outside the Roman Church all over the world. So they've done a masterful job on that. You're going to create the, and the Freemasons, they're going to work on the military and affecting government, which they've done all throughout history since their creation. The Jesuits are going to control education within the church and the banking arm, and they're on the leading edge of all the exploration in the world. No coincidence there, just as you had a Templar flag flying on the Santa Maria, and of course the Jesuits were the priests that were on there. So again, all working together towards the same goal of a universal religion with a universal government, the new Atlantis that Bacon talks about. The Rosicrucians are going to look after the old religion, make sure that stays alive, and methodically control all aspects of the media and entertainment. That's why you see all of these great aspects of literature, whether it's Shakespeare all the way back into Ovides or the Greek classics. This is a long transgenerational history of doing this, that they're just continuing right through to fairy tales, right through to science fiction, right through to superhero stuff, right through to Walt Disney and what he does or did. It's all part of that. And their Rosicrucians are to maintain that global Gnosticism, who created Theosophy, which was went rogue on them with Germany, which became Ariosophy. And of course, New Age comes out of Theosophy at the time, just after Roswell, and the idea of we're not alone in the universe starts to take hold. So they just sort of evolve it. And this is the religion that they envisioned would be a religion that harmonizes with science in the end time.
Okay.
So it's part of the whole sort of New Atlantis. And the Illuminati is created to try and destroy Christianity. That's their number one goal, and to focus on world government.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, did I miss any of them? That's generally the major ones that spin out of the Knights Templar. And they continue to this day, and they'll control most of the other organizations. So if you understand sort of a quick understanding of the hierarchy, you got Freemasonry, Illuminati, which is the inner circle and the illuminated adepts of Freemasonry, and then to the Rosicrucians. And so you've got, when you look now at organizations like the Bilderbergers, for example, they will report right into the Rosicrucians, right?
Okay.
Just as the lower branch of the Bilderbergers, when they meet in Europe, where like Bill Gates or somebody will go, that will report to below the Bohemians, up to the Bohemian Inner Circle Society, and back into the Rosicrucians, just as the Bohemian Grove, which also has the owl, which is the other allegory for the matriarchal side that goes back to Lilith and Tiamat, will report into the Illuminati and up the chain, because it's just not seen in the organizational structure as having enough pedigree to be sort of higher, right?
Wow. Now, I actually got a listener question that was sent in, and it asked, is the religion of the elites, the secret societies, is it Gnosticism? And which came first, Christianity or Gnosticism?
Well, the first question is Freemasonry is on record as having the Gnostic religion. And it's the global Gnostic religion, and it's the Gnosticism that was forming around the time with those other groups that I was talking about, with the Sethites and the Cainites and the Essenes and the Sabaeans and the Alexandria Mystery Schools and Mandaeans and Manichaeans, and there's just a whole group, but they're coming together to unite the original pantheon.
Okay.
That was originally formed before the flood, and then again starts at Babel, but gets dispersed. And then all the names change with different vernacular names. They have a few different rituals, but it's all the same religion. So, they're matching that up with the Greek philosophies. They're trying to reunite the old religion under one umbrella religion, right? Wow. So this religion then goes back to Zoroastrianism, which is much older. So the roots of the religion, whether it's Mithricism, which also goes back to Zoroastrianism, is way older than Christianity and older than Judaism, right?
Wow.
Because we don't get monotheism until, almost 400 years after the flood with Abraham, right? And in the meantime, you have this void, and you've had Babel, and you see the activity of that mystical religion. And this is the same religion that was before the flood, that Enoch, son of Cain, actually invented. And you'll have different names all around the world, did I answer that question fully?
I think that you explained very well, exactly, that Gnosticism is most definitely the secret religion, and that its roots are much older than Christianity originally. Why do you think that Christianity is the one that they feel they can absorb, though, Gary?
That's a good question, and I'll touch on that. I just to finish the other answer I was just
Okay.
thinking that people need to understand Freemasonry because it's lower level and they're bringing in outside people. It's a preparatory organization that is introducing people to the occult religions, right? And this occult religion is the Gnostics, or Theosophy as it's also called, and Gnosticism is the parent. But there's no doubt that they believe that, you know, their religion is called Gnosticism. And I'm sorry, I forgot now what the last question was that I'm supposed to be answering right now.
Oh no! I just wanted to know why they feel that they can't absorb Christianity the way they can the other religions.
They're trying. They're absolutely trying. And that's why they have so many moles within the Roman Church all throughout history, and the Jesuits, or the monastic orders. And they want to be able to turn that church over to be sort of the capital city of the religion in the end time. That's the goal of the Jesuits. So they're always working at doing that. And a lot of people think that Protestantism was a secret society gambit to try and weaken the Roman Church, but it just sort of backfired on them, because Protestantism is the real force that is opposing Gnosticism and secret societies today. So it may have weakened the Roman Church, but it didn't weaken Christianity. And if you can't get lions in the Colosseum and slaughtering people en masse to convert Christians, all this other stuff isn't going to convert the true believer. And what they don't understand is to be a Christian is you have to choose it, and you have to really want to believe it, and you want to live that every day, and you're not going to give that up. But they feel that they have to control it or destroy it if they're going to bring about the New Age, because the Christians are a very stubborn bunch. And so the only way it's going to be happening is they're going to continue to isolate Christians until the end time, and then they're going to slaughter us en masse.
The word says that. I mean, so now what do you say to people that will bring up that the letter J didn't exist until, the Romans came along, and so John, James, Jesus, all these names couldn't possibly be true? What would you say to that, Gary? Because this is one I get all the time. So.
And if somebody wants a document on this in terms of the letter J and Jesus and that, get a hold of me through my website, genesis6conspiracy.com, or through Facebook, Gary Wayne, and I'll send you that document. But the short story is that when the English language is being formed, from the English side, it's a little bit different story with Spanish, where you do have the J. But in the English language, we don't have a J before the 1600s. Right? And Francis Bacon, who is going to organize the Helmet Society and the Spear Shaker Society, and that's why people think that Bacon, part of the reasons why he was actually Shakespeare, he's going to try and modernize the English language, make it a world-class religion. So he's organizing all of these writers, just as you would have, like, people might be familiar with the Inkling Society. They're going to write all these different plays and books and things. And in this case, so where the Shakespeare plays start to come from is through these two writer societies. And again, writing that same sort of system that I was talking about earlier, whether it's fairy tales and entertainment. They're going to have their history and their genealogies and everything that's encoded into that kind of writing. And so at that time, they're introduced the J. We don't know why they introduced the J, but they do. Because we already have the ability with the hard G and the soft G. We don't really need a J. We already have a Y, so we don't need that sounding to it, but they're going to introduce that. And so, the name of Jesus in the original Greek, or if you take it back to Hebrew, and there's a couple similar spellings, all meaning the same thing, would be basically Yeshua, right?
Yes.
And so the J is substituted for the Y, and it has become Jesus, or Jesus, in our language. And I think when God knows that, and Jesus knows that if we're praying to them and with them, they know who we're praying to. So I'm not real concerned about whether or not you use Jesus or Yeshua. But I think it was a ploy to get people not to use the exact name of Jesus, which is Yeshua. Exactly.
Wow.
So I think that's what they were trying to do, because again, these were all Gnostics and secret society people, and Bacon is a Rosicrucian and the inspirational founder to the Royal Society. That's the other group that I didn't talk about earlier. In fact, his painting hangs in the entrance of the Royal Society in England as its inspirational founder, and based on his writings like The New Atlantis, for example, that I had mentioned previously, and a number of other books, and his thinking of what they were trying to bring about. And so the Royal Society was formed to control education and the sciences outside of the church, which is why science and education still pay homage to the Royal Society today as the parent organization, just as James Smithson, who donated the money for the Smithsonian Institute, was Royal Society and Rosicrucian. So again, just when you follow the bloodlines, you need to understand that the bloodlines is the key to understanding the religion and the organizational structure and the governments that we've had, because that's the important key here. So at the end of the day, we had a bunch of Rosicrucians that were forming the English language, and I think they changed it on purpose. And then they take on, let's do the Bible. At the time of King James, who is from the Stuart dynasty, who are all Freemasons, and come from Robert the Bruce from his daughter's side, because he didn't have a son, who protected the Freemasons coming, or the Templars coming over after their fall, because he was excommunicated from the Roman Church at that time because he murdered his rival in a Catholic church. And so in reward for that, the Templars rushed the field at the Battle of Bannockburn at the end of the day, which to ensure that Bruce is going to have his own kingship separate from England, and that they can continue to thrive. And I know the secular history says those are the servants, but if you get into Albert Mackey and his history of Freemasonry, it's quite clear those were the Freemasons, or those were the Templars rushing the field. And of course, they were the best trained knights and army in the world at that time, so they caught the English totally by surprise. So again, I know I went down another rabbit trail there, but that's sort of the whole key to the that's when it came in place, and it's all part of that whole transition period. And it's really, to me, once you start unlocking some of these keys, you can understand history so much better, because you understand what was really going on.
Absolutely. And I think that history has definitely been altered by the victors. And, that's to me, that's a big indication that they have intentionally, tried to set up the demise of Christianity with the King James Version, and from Yeshua to Jesus. I mean, something's not right about that.
Yeah. And I think the King James Version is a very good translation. But like all the translations, they have some issues. And this one has the King James, and I use it a lot because that's the standard that people like to refer to for the most part. But I also use 5 other translations, and I also take it back to Hebrew and I take it back to Greek. So I'm not going to be fooled by some mistakes or some corruptions, let us say, changes, because the King James Bible has the word Lord used for God like over 6,000 times.
Wow.
Right? Instead of Yahweh.
Yeah.
And people will say, well, that's fine, because Adonai means my Lord. And Adonai is a Hebrew word, and it shows up in the Bible 427 times legitimately for my Lord.
Yeah.
Right? So they're doing a play on words with Lord and my Lord. Adon would be Lord, and the A makes it my Lord, the AI, because they call the God of the Bible Adonai.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
As opposed to Yahweh.
Yeah, yeah.
So 6,000 times it's mistranslated, and why they wouldn't use Yahweh is beyond my understanding.
Yeah.
And they also have things in there like the unicorn, and the
Mm.
unicorn is not what we understand it as in the mythology today as this white horse with a single horn. That's polytheist version of a unicorn. It's actually rem is the Hebrew word, and it's a wild bull. It may have one
Yeah.
horn. It doesn't say how many horns it had, but it's not the image that we get coming out of modern understanding of what a unicorn is. And the reason why unicorn is in there is because it is the emblem of the James Stewart dynasty,
Mm.
right?
Wow.
And on their coat of arms, they actually have a unicorn.
And a lot of people believe the unicorn is a representation of the Antichrist. So,
Well, certainly with that white horse that comes out as part of the four riders. And the understanding in polytheism is that these great leaders would ride a white horse. And in the antediluvian epoch, a white horse with a horn, a single horn. And so now if you key back in that the King James and Stuart dynasty is called the Unicorn dynasty, and you understand that the
wow.
bloodlines are the bloodline of the Nephilim, and that they've got this white stallion with a single horn as part of their coat of arms, all of a sudden things start to make some sense again, and why it might show up in the King James Bible.
Wow. Wow. What are some of the most common, correct? Let me just ask you about this. A lot of people want to compare Lucifer, the morning star, to Jesus, the bright morning star. What do you do to dispel that confusion?
Well, I mean, when it says Lucifer in the King James Bible, that's the only Bible it really shows up in, other than the Vulgate Bible, which was a Latin Bible. Lucifer is a Latin word. It's not an
Okay.
English word, and it's not a Hebrew word. But
Ah.
magically, it shows up in the King James Version Bible in Isaiah 14:12. The Hebrew word is Hail-El, Heylel, not Lucifer. And so other translations will say day star or morning star. But what it says is, the son of the dawn, or son of Lucifer, son of the morning. Well, the thing is that's referring to a Venus type allegory with Lucifer, right? It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with Jesus being the true morning star.
Yeah.
It's actually son of the dawn, as in Venus, which is what
Yeah.
it's got nothing to do with the morning star, which is Jesus there. It's a conflation, and it's done there on purpose, and put in, I think, in the King James Bible. I know a lot of people are going to not like that. And again, I have a document on all of this if people want it, so that you can read it in depth and get a fuller understanding of what I'm talking about. So, and again, I'm not saying the King James Bible is bad anyway. It's just not perfect. And that's why I like to have different translations and take things back to Hebrew, so I know what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I recently, about 6 months ago, started reading the Hebraic root version, and I was blown away at how much everything was Elohim, Yahweh,
Yep.
Yeshua, Messiah. I mean, a lot of the words, just the way they changed. I
Yep.
wanted to ask you.
Well, I'm just going to throw out
You
one
could.
other one that's just inexplicable, and I won't dwell on it. But
All right.
these are markers that the translators put in.
Okay.
Just as if you understand history, you understand how powerful Francis Bacon was. He was the
Yeah.
right-hand advisor, the second most powerful person in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. And then when it's transitioned over to King James, of whom the King James Bible is named after, and is the one who creates the English language that they're going to use now in the King James Version, which I think has done a world of good for Christianity that they didn't plan on. They were just looking to take their
Yeah.
oral traditions to written tradition to swear oaths on and put in as part of their extended Bible. So they had another reason, but it was held up for almost a year before it was published, and it was sitting in the hands of, guess who, Bacon, who was doing the final edit on it from the group of writers, the 47 translators that they had, as I recall. And he put the final edits on it. And in fact, the first edition came out with actually Masonic symbols on the cover. And they, of course, that didn't go over well in some circles, and they quickly took that off and, you know, put a more plain cover on it. So the other one that is inexplicable is in Acts 12:4, where it says Easter. Okay. And of course, Easter is where, you know, what we call Resurrection Day today. And Easter goes back to Ishtar and Ashtaroth and all these mother goddesses, and just that's why you have Easter eggs for fertility and stuff like that. Well, the word in Greek is Pascha, which means Passover. It doesn't say Easter. Yes. And you don't see Easter used any other time in the Greek New Testament, just that one time. And then people will say, well, that's because Jerusalem and the Jewish people had become so corrupted and so polytheist at that time, they were calling Passover Easter. That's what they're told. That's the brainwashing that they're even told in seminaries. And it's absolutely hogwash, because this is just a few short years after the crucifixion, when you have Acts 12:4. And they wouldn't have forgotten to call Passover Passover. And what is the other thing that people don't understand is Passover begins the feast of unleavened bread. So you have Passover and a special Sabbath, which leads into the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which goes for a week. Well, in 12:3, it says the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But verse 4 says Easter. So it makes no sense that they would remember the festival and follow that if they were so corrupt and disbelieving. Not on Passover. I mean, it makes no sense, because Passover leads into that festival. And so the arguments under scrutiny and taking it back to Greek and Hebrew, it's inexplicable that these translators could have made that mistake. I think it's a marker to say who they were, who was doing the translation. But like I say, overall, the Bible is a very good translation in the King James, and I'm not here to slam it. I think all translations have some issues, but it doesn't lose a whole lot of meaning in its text. But do expect in the end time they're going to use those markers against us. They're there for a reason, and that's why I like to point it out.
And we're seeing that now. We're seeing that really start to emerge. That's why I have questions about the J. That's why I have questions about these kind of things. And you can even look at, it's all to discredit Christianity in my point of view, because you see Christmas, it's connected to Saturnalia, and we're seeing all religion be injected with this Saturn worship. Now, how do you think we can avoid being caught in that kind of pitfall, Gary?
Well, I mean, it's everywhere. And so we need to be looking at things, just as we don't celebrate the Sabbath on the Saturday. We celebrate it on Sunday. And what we're told is that, well, that's the day that Jesus was resurrected. I don't have a problem with that. But the Sabbath is still the Saturday. But the good thing, though, is that, you know, even though we're, as Christians, are told to uphold the law, we're also free from the laws, and we're governed by the spirit of the law, as Paul likes to talk about. So it's the spirit of things that count as we're grafted into the covenant with our new covenant. So we don't have to be quite as dogmatic, but we're also told that if you have the spirit in you, then you will be led back to fulfill the law. So as you know and as you learn these things and overcome them, try and take it back to its basic principles. And the term Saturn, as you're talking about, is such a key sort of aspect of what was being mixed into Christianity at the time of when Christianity was being made the state religion under Constantinople, where he basically homogenized two religions.
Yep.
And he mixed in a lot of Mithricism, which is just another version of polytheism and part of that Gnostic movement that was in Italy at that time, so that he could unite his empire and use it for control. And so it was all for his purposes on control, but on the positive side, I mean, it allowed Christianity to be stopped being persecuted and to flourish, although it went the other direction and started to persecute other people, which is not part of Christianity. But the Saturn understanding is part of the Rosicrucian and Gnostic religion, that it is sort of the chief planet, right? Because it comes from one of the main parent gods out of the Roman pantheon. Right. And so if you see some old Rosicrucian pictures with almost like a flat Earth sort of model with a dome and with a planet, it will have these 7 planets, and Saturn's going to be the main one. So, you know, you've got Saturn, you've got Jupiter, and Jupiter's the son of Saturn in the Roman pantheon, and you've got Mars, and you've got the sun, you've got Mercury, Venus, and the moon. And Saturn is equivalent in the Greek pantheon to Kronos.
Yes. Yeah.
Who is part of the parent gods, with Zeus being an offspring of the parent gods Gaia and Uranus, as I recall. Some accounts has it Kronos, but and so Zeus is that second tier of gods, of those lower gods that would be equivalent to Jupiter, right? So Jupiter is basically Zeus, and Saturn is Kronos. And again, just to show you how these pantheons are kind of all the same around the world. And so we see this again, being represented in the literature, just as we talked about the Inkling Society of Oxford, where was as a writing society that was like the Helmet or the Spear Shaking Society back in Bacon's time. You have Lewis and Tolkien and Charles Williams and many others being members of this society and coming out with all of this Gnostic, not Christian. So if people are Lewis and Tolkien fans, understand this is polytheist language. And again, I've got several documents and series of documents on Tolkien and Lewis if people want it. But what Lewis did in the Tales of Narnia, in his 7 tales, he named and as the theme of those stories after these 7 planets.
Wow.
Right? And Saturn is the last battle. And again, when you get in and understand the language of what they're talking about, and he's even encoded the Christ consciousness aspect in the Narnia tales. So Aslan is a lion, and Lewis is very, very clear that he is an incarnation of what Jesus would look like on another planet in another type of being. Incarnation is not what Jesus was. Jesus was the Word implanted by the Holy Spirit into Mary, which developed the body around the world so the world could become flesh and interact in this world. An incarnation is an avatar, and they have an avatar, generally a baby, and growing into adulthood, but already born in a symbiotic relationship, which is completely different than what happens with Jesus. And it comes out of the Eastern religions, which again, they're all connected. And if Aslan is, you could look at him as the 4th incarnation of Vishnu.
Really?
The 4th incarnation of Vishnu is a god called Narashima.
Okay.
And people want to Google Narashima, you're going to find out this is a lion god.
Ah, okay.
Right? And the name Aslan is likely comes from Arslan, which has some ancient sort of writings on it, and it has a Lamassu on there, which is a lion type of Lilith kind of god, only on a male aspect and with lion features. So again, just some quick things. And Buddha is the 10th incarnation of Vishnu. So this Aslan incarnation is as a Christ consciousness aspect, and clearly said as an incarnation. But then again, Lewis said the Bible was a fairy tale, and that it's the superficial writing isn't the real story, and you need to be an adept to understand the mysteries. Now, we don't know that Lewis or Tolkien were part of Freemasonry, but if you're going to be part of a Rosicrucian-sponsored society, which the Inklings are, you're going to have to be an adept. And Charles William came from the Golden Dawn order.
Okay.
So Tolkien and Lewis are quite young because they're at university in Oxford. Williams is much older, and he's kind of the mentor, and he's teaching them the skills in this craft. So the only way, and of course in England you don't have a release of the names in the lodges. We can't go verify it that way in Freemasonry as you could more easily in North America. But they're still too young to be an adept at that age in Freemasonry, because you have to be an adult to be part of Freemasonry, and they're just in their early 20s at this point. So how can this be? And that's why people say, well, there's no way they're part of the secret societies. But if you don't understand the pureblood aspect that we were talking about in the bloodlines and how this works in the religion and the societies, then you don't have a clue. So the purebloods are initiated from childhood.
Wow.
And they're an adept by the time they're in their teens. So over in North America, you might hear somebody say, I'm a 32nd degree adept of the Scottish Rite.
Yeah.
And they'll be fairly young. Well, you can't be an adept at 32 degrees. You have to be 33rd degree.
Okay.
Right? Okay. That's where you become the adept. But because a pureblood is too young to have the label yet, and the title of being an adept, you have to be of a certain age before, even though you have the knowledge and even more, they call themselves in the Scottish Rite a 32nd degree adept. That would be how they would be able to be taught by the Rosicrucians. And you have to become an adept in Freemasonry, then become higher level in the Illuminati. So let's make it simpler. In the York Rite, it's 3 degrees. As the old mysticism one, it's not broken down into 33 degrees. So to oversee other lodges, you're going to have to be at least 5th degree.
Okay.
Right. And then from there up, to get into the Rosicrucians, you're going to have to be higher than 5th degree. I only know, and I don't even know what they are, but I only know of 9 degrees total. But some people say there's as high as 12 or 13 degrees, but I've not been able to verify that. So they would have been actually higher than 3rd degree when they were doing the writings, being initiated from childhood. They were just learning their craft, and that was the idea of the Inkling Society, is to test amongst each other and be coached and helped on how to write all of these genealogies. And that's why you have other beings showing up, like Mr. What is it, Timmons or Tummons or something like that. He's the satyr that Lucy meets. Tamaz, I think it is, meets after, traveling through a portal in the wardrobe over to the other world, which is another fairy religious doctrine, and meets this satyr goat god, right? This is like Azazel. This is like Pan, right? And Bacchus is also in there, and Bacchus in the Roman mythology is also a goat god. So I think he's clearly using polytheist gods in there, plus incarnations. And then you have the White Witch, who is going to go back to, has no human bloodlines in her whatsoever, goes back to Lilith on one side, and giants on the other side, known as jinn, which are in the Quran, as being 2 groups. One being an angelic jinn or an angel, and one being a demigod, lower god, and that's who Lilith is thought to go back to. And she's going to be replaced by Lucy, which is a variation of the Lucifer name that comes out of Latin. I mean,
Wow.
the whole thing is nothing but Gnostic belief systems and genealogies all the way through. And the White Witch oversees all sorts of creatures, a whole list of things, whether or not they're werewolves and they're incubuses and they're dwarves and hobbits. I mean, you name the violation against the laws of creation that was created before the flood, she oversees them.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's absolutely crazy. And you know what? I've even heard pastors at church quote, which is crazy. So I don't think a lot of people, know that.
No, they don't. And a lot of people will say, no, we know he converted. I said, okay, I accept that. He says he was Christian, but lots of Gnostics say they're Christian. They just don't accept Jesus as the Word of God and the Son of God. They say, accept him as a mortal prophet who didn't die on the cross. Two different things. Yeah. And the other thing is, we know Protestantism is filled with Gnostic moles. Because again, they're trying to lead us astray. The churches are filled with them. And their approach is the allegorical approach as opposed to the literal approach, which is part of that corruption. But the biggest indictment, I would say, is this in terms of Lewis and Tolkien. If they ever did convert totally to Christianity, they never denounced the writings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's part of the Faustian deal. If you ever want to escape that, you have to expose what you traded, to get that. Can I ask you a question, though, about the 7 sacred sciences and kind of what they are and where they from the fallen angels?
From a biblical perspective, we don't really understand how this knowledge comes about. But what we do know is Adam is taught many things in Eden, right? He's created, from the dirt, and he's going to become this agricultural sort of wizard looking after the Eden garden, right? And he's going to teach this to Cain and Abel once they're ostracized. So from the Gnostic and secret society belief is that Adam was taught this knowledge in Eden and was passed on to Cain and Abel and then later to Seth. But Cain, when he's ostracized for killing Abel, is very knowledgeable in all of this knowledge that comes from God and starts to develop it. And the first thing he does is he builds a city, which is a typical Masonic thing, right? That's recorded in the Bible. And for people that we don't even know why you would build a city if there's just him, and we don't know who he marries, and he goes to a place called Nod, already has a name, to build this city. So but that's another rabbit hole I won't go down now. I don't think the Bible is in contradiction. There's two different creations going on here, in my opinion. But from the Masonic and Gnostic perspective is that he now teaches this knowledge to Enoch, his son. And it's Enoch who develops this knowledge into the 7 sciences and the 7 disciplines that we know as the 7 liberal arts today, which the Royal Society controls and reintroduced and sort of modernized. And they called themselves the founders. The founders were all Freemasons and Rosicrucians of the Royal Society. They actually call themselves in the craft the last of the sorcerers and the first of the scientists, just to do that sort of transition from magic to what we call science today. But it's the same sort of knowledge that they're developing. And so it's this 7 sciences that Enoch is going to develop, and then it's going to combine with the knowledge that comes from the gods, from the fallen angels. That's going to accelerate this knowledge to a level where I think their knowledge was greater than what we have today. So that they could build these megaliths like the pyramids or Machu Picchu. And the Freemasons believe that the pyramids were either built by Enoch or from the knowledge that he had written down to be able to build this. And this is the knowledge that Hermes finds from the pillars of Lamech that he finds that takes to Babel that we talked about earlier. And So at the time when you have the fallen angels creating the giants and this knowledge coming down to the Cainites, that's going to create this religion and this organizational structure that's going to come through all through time. It now accelerates the knowledge at an extraordinarily fast pace, because it's not very long after that until the flood comes. We see
Okay.
this happening today. Our knowledge
Uh-huh.
is exploding. Our knowledge of the sciences are exploding in all sorts of ways that I think is in preparation for the end time battle they're trying to get us ready for and deceive us with, which is going to happen in the end time. And I think we're receiving this help from the fallen angels, not the ones from the abyss yet, who are locked in there because they don't get out until close to the midpoint of the last 7 years. But not all the fallen angels were put in the abyss. So I think they're interacting and helping because our knowledge is accelerating at an unprecedented pace that looks like the days of Noah, which is why I believe Jesus said it will be like the days of Noah. And Noah lived 350 years after the flood and 600 years before the flood and at the time of the giants. And that's why I also think we need to understand Sodom and Gomorrah and Babel as part of the days of Noah. And of course, Babel is the religion of the end time that's described in the Bible that was reignited at Babel, which was Enochian mysticism from before the flood.
Wow. 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 That's very, to me, I think that, a lot of people now, don't understand that technology, and this is just my opinion, that technology is nothing more than, this magic from the fallen angels.
Yeah, it's the same knowledge. Nothing is new under the sun. This has all happened before. And again, we need to understand that. And again, we're told nothing is new under the sun in the Bible. And it's the same sort of rebellion that's gone on from before the flood to what happened at Babel. They're always trying to get control of the world to develop their own realm away from God, the God of the Bible, just as that's what Lucifer, or Satan, as I prefer to call him, or Halel in Isaiah 14 is described as doing. He wanted a realm or a kingdom and to be like God, separate from God.
Absolutely.
Right? That's what they're always trying to bring about. So we need to understand that there are two sides, and you need to be sure which side you're on. And I'll leave that decision up for everybody to make their own choice on. But please make an informed decision. I think this is these are things that need to be discussed, out there, so that people can make that choice. And not making a choice is a decision. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, many people believe that the God of the Old Testament is Satan. Do you believe this to be true? And, what background do you have or insights as to the origins of all this?
Well, in Gnosticism and polytheism is the God of the Bible is the evil God. So that's the source. And again, it depends on which side that you're on, because they call Satan the God of light and knowledge, who frees humankind from the evil oppressor of the Bible, which is our God. So understand there's two sides, and that's where that comes from. And that they use examples of the flood as God as being an evil being, and of the conquest as God as being evil. Well, here's the real story. The real story, as far as my beliefs go, because I believe in terms of the Bible's perspective on it. And believe me, whether or not it's a polytheist religion or a monotheist religion, they're telling the same story, just from a different lens, right?
Absolutely.
So parallel accounts, you might say, just have a different bias. But I think the real story is what's recorded in the Bible. So, Adam is created after the rebellious angels have already corrupted creation. And he's developed to save humankind, because everybody is following the gods in these civilizations, and they're worshiping the gods, and the Watchers have led everybody away from God. So Adam is now created to resolve this issue. Understanding God is Alpha Omega, and he sees everything from the beginning to the end. So you don't fool God. He anticipates things. So Adam is created in a separate creation than the people of day 6.
Okay.
And I've got a document of people who want the differences between the Eden account and day 6 account. They're irreconcilable. And I don't believe the Bible contradicts itself. So 2 creations. Now it starts to answer where Cain gets his wife from the people of day 6, right? And why the daughters of Ben are the same language as used in day 6 that the sons of God are going to marry, because that's the day 6 daughters who Cain went over and perverted with his 7 sacred sciences, who have been prepped to mate with the gods, right? Okay.
Wow.
So Adam is created as a separate entity in singular as opposed to in plural.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not told to multiply and expand throughout the earth. He's put in the Garden of Eden. And then later, Eve is created from a rib. So 2 totally different stories going on here. Lots of differences. That would be one of them. But he has the breath of God breathed into him, unlike what happens in day 6.
Okay.
And so Adam is created to raise humankind above their oppressors, above the rebellious ones in the future time. So he has a special commission, and that's why we have his genealogies, so that even though Satan gets his first revenge in Eden, and they fall from there, you get the second revenge of him leading the Watchers to Mount Hermon to mate with the daughters of day 6 to create the Nephilim, to usurp them. As a second revenge, none of this is going to prevent what's going on. God gives us a complete restart because the whole world is taken over by these giants, right? The whole world becomes corrupt, not just and not just with violence. The whole world is corrupt. That means the genomes and the animals and the beings, just as we can do DNA manipulation and things today. It's like the days of Noah. We're getting there. And that's why in all of these different parallel stories of the antediluvian world, you have all of these beings, whether they're chimera or centaurs or werewolves or whatever, right? There's just all of these different violations against creations, little people, and on and on and on and on. I think that actually took place. As part of that corruption. So God is going to give the descendants of Adam through Seth, who have this pure lineage, the opportunity for a reset. But he knows that we're going to have Nephilim and things are going to get corrupted on the other side. But it's our second chance. So again, it becomes another sort of nail in the coffin that is sentencing the eventual sentence going to the rebellious angels into the lake of fire. And so they don't want humans to be raised above angels in the future kind, because it destroys the reason for their rebellion, that God is evil and there's a different way, but all they do is produce evil and rebellion. And so all throughout history, they've been trying to create a rebellion and destroy humankind, just as they were doing before the flood. So in the New Age, there's no room for non-purebloods or people who don't have the gene of Isis, or people who don't have the spark of the divine, or people who don't have the 1,000 points of light, which is, language that is used by the Bushes for the New World Order, and is a Gnostic term referring to the descendants of the Nephilim. They only want 500 million people or less who are direct pure-blood descendants of the demigods, and humans aren't in there except for servitude and sacrifice. So the New Age is not for us. So anyways, we get a new start, and he stops all of this violence. But in polytheist religions, it's the pantheon of gods that bring on the flood. They've just changed the story, but they say God's the evil one, but yet they like to take credit for it inside their own religion. It's not really consistent, but that's what they do. And then they use the conquest of the Promised Land as another source of barbarism, or the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the 2 other classic examples they like to use. Well, Sodom and Gomorrah, and I have a document on second incursion where I think that second incursion either happened at Sodom and Gomorrah or on Mount Hermon, and then they went to Sodom and Gomorrah afterwards, just as the Sethites believe, and what is in the tablets of Seth in the invisible spirit gospel of Sodom and Gomorrah being the replanting of the Amaka Seth Nephilim branch after the flood.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So where I'm going with this is they look at Sodom and Gomorrah as city of knowledge, city of light,
Okay.
city of liberalism, city of everything of their dreams. It's the shining city. It's the same allegory that Camelot, notice the word L-O-T in there, lot, and from Cam also shining, so it's a shining city of Lot in the meaning that everybody likes to look at as even Ronald Reagan says, US, I like to look at them as Camelot, the shining city on a hill. And just as the Kennedys are Camelot dynasty, right? Like they just, if you understand their language, you know what they're talking about. As opposed to being this brutal city where they oppressed people. It was definitely a feudal system that was set up there. All sorts of debaucheries and things were going on, and thumbing their nose at the God of the Bible. So that's why that's destroyed, right? Because, and even in the Bible story, where you have these two men, and they look like men who are angels, they go to Sodom. The people want to have sex with them, right? Just as you have the precedent of angels having sex to produce Nephilim. We also know angels have this changeling capability because they need to take a physical form, and we see them in all sorts of forms throughout the Bible. So then we know they can take any sex or any form that they want. And so they wanted to have sex with them, I think, to create more Nephilim, because they're very familiar with this whole concept living in Sodom, and somehow they recognize them as being angels. And in Jude, it talks about this discussion, as it does in Peter, this disgusting conversation that they're having of having sex with strange flesh. And this strange flesh, when you take that back into the Greek, it is meaning a different species, a different kind. So they literally knew these men were angels they wanted to have sex with. So again, I think that's the underlying aspect that was going on with all of the other reasons for destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, moving forward to the conquest, you have all of these giant nations, whether or not it's the Rephaim that Og and Sihon are from, and which seems to be the parent branch of these giants, like the Avim with the Philistines, or the Emim, or the Zamzuzim, or the Zuzim, or the Horim, or the Hivim, and on and on and on of all these giant names. They have purposefully settled in God's apportioned land, in the covenant land, waiting in ambush for Israel and that hasn't even been born yet, from very shortly after the flood, because Abraham travels there and is living amongst these giants and defiling the land with polytheism, which is an abomination to my God, the God of the Bible. And so they've waited for generations for the nation of hope coming from Adam that I talked about in this creation, so that Israel cannot take the land, and they cannot create the lineage through Judah for the Messiah.
Wow.
So that's what's going on. And these nations are led by Rephaim, they're supported by Rephaim, and they've interbred with the Canaanites to create hybrid nations that were taller and stronger with chariots. And the Israelites don't have any chariots or weapons. These are ragtag slaves who spend a generation in the desert getting their faith under control and trying to prepare for battle, but they don't have chariots, they don't have horses, they don't have iron. They're going up against many nations, more numerous, taller, stronger, bigger, better trained, better weapons, and everybody they fight, they win. They don't take all the land of the covenant land, because that will come in the millennium that's coming, but they take a lot of the land and at least get a time of rest. And so this is not a war of slaughtering innocent people. These are monsters. These are giants. These are powerful people that are trying to wipe Israel from the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And so Israel doesn't do all of it. They don't follow God's words to the letter of the law, and they let survivors live, even though they do a lot of slaughtering. And they come back and hurt Israel and causes backsliding, and eventually causes the dispersion of Judah and losing of Israel to the four corners, and we won't even see them again until the end time, when they awaken and remember who they are and are called by name in the second Exodus. So what's going on here is a completely different story than what secular history might tell you, or what the polytheist religions might tell you. And the other thing that's going on is the first battle happens shortly after coming out of Egypt, and that's the Battle of Rephidim. And it's against the Amalekim. And the Amalekim are giants recorded in the War of Giants in Genesis 14, and an intermarriage with the Horim between Eliphaz, son of Esau, and Timnah, which is a Horim to create Amalek, which is going to become the hybrid nation of the Amalekim giants that are going to fight Israel in the first battle, when they're not just, they are at this point ragtag slaves, not trained in anything, right? Probably not well fed. And they come out and they're going to attack them. And God fights for Israel that day, but there's more going on here.
Okay.
It's just not that the Amalekim have come out to wipe Israel from the face of the earth for no reason.
Yeah.
If you understand that Isaac, who is the younger, Jacob, who is the younger son of Isaac, with Esau, who is his older brother, Isaac steals and deceives and gets the blessings and birthrights and Messianic blessing that Esau would have gotten normally as the firstborn. This doesn't sit well with Esau. And we understand that from things in the Bible, but it goes downstream through the generations. And so now you have descendants of Esau, son of Isaac's grandson of Abraham, who creates monotheism, intermarrying with giants to create the great Amalekite nation. And if they were to wipe Israel from the face of the earth by law, who would inherit the birthright blessings, the overall blessings, and the Messiah? They're trying to steal all of that by wiping Israel from the face of the earth and to replace it with their own ragged Messiah, which they will end up presenting anyways in the end time, but they were trying to make sure they had complete control to ensure humankind would be led off the cliff and into the abyss following them.
Wow. Now, you speak of Israel, and this kind of brings me to a question, and then I'm going to take it to the viewers and let them ask a few, because I know you're kind of on a time limit, and I want to get you out of here in time.
Yep.
Now, Israel, do you believe that they are, this government, this nation that we see presented to us now, that many believe are the synagogues of Satan, controlled by Zionists? Lots of people believe that they're particular races. What is your take on this?
Yeah, and there's a lot of partial truths and half truths going on out there, and so I won't dismiss the notion that everybody in Israel is not from Jewish or Israelite bloodlines, and whether or not they're the Ashkenazi that intermarries, or the Edomites or whatever. I think there's a distinct possibility that that's been intermixed, and it may even be a very large percentage of them. It is also true that the Kabbalistic and mystical side of Judaism, from the Essenes and other groups, is the polytheist side of Judaism, which is part of the secret societies and the satanic Jews, and were in the elders of Zion and so on and so forth. So that's also partially true. I mean, we know that, right?
Yeah.
But where people and people will also say, and Israel being created is part of the Zionist plan and the Rothschilds and the secret societies to do so. So all of these people over in Israel are satanic Jews and they're all fake Jews. Well, that's not true either. So there is a remnant. However large that remnant is, there is still a remnant because God has prophesied for them in the end time. As he has prophesied for the awakening of Israel. That's why Ezekiel 37, 38, and 39 is so important for people to read and understand, because not only do you have the dry bones coming together of all of Israel, and that's mixed in with a second Exodus led by the Messiah and David, their king. You also have that leads into the Gog War, which happens after the abyss is opened in Revelation 9. And it's in the last days. And Ezekiel 39 will also reference the second Exodus as well. And this is the Third World War that is going to be used as the fake Armageddon War, which is Revelation 9, which is when the abyss is opened, and the same as Joel 1 and 2, which is why all the beings are the same. And Gog and Magog are also giants and giant names. They are the sons of Poseidon, Iapetus, the same god, which the descendants of Japheth, they intermarried with when they moved into the Turkey-Scythia region that we talked about earlier with the Tuatha De Danann. So you see where that starts to get that sort of intersection, as well as being an alliance of nations, right? And and so when we bring all of that together, we get a very quick understanding in there that is so clear that it says God will fight for Israel with those people in the land at that time. And he will save them. Now, Antichrist will claim that he saved them and to use as for the veracity of his Christ credentials. And come back and try and deliver peace. And just as Jesus comes back at Armageddon, wins a war, and brings in 1,000-year millennium, he's going to try and do that just a little over 3.5 years before Jesus does that. And it's going to be, everything's going to be counterfeit. But that's what they all do. Everything's counterfeit. And so when we look at what is being talked about there, God is not standing up and fighting for satanic Jews. He's fighting for the remnant that is still there. These are the people when they see the abomination at the 3.5-year point, just as Luke says the armies are surrounding Jerusalem. Those will be Antichrist's army after the Gog War, surrounding Jerusalem and crowning himself as king of the world, as Messiah, as Antichrist in the temple, which is the abomination. That's when Judea flees to the mountain. That's when Revelation 12 kicks in, where the people of Judea are fleeing, and the dragon is chasing them and trying to destroy them from the face of the earth. And then he turns to try and destroy all the followers of Jesus, because the angels have been thrown down from heaven. This is the last 3.5 years. Israel has awakened. They have already been locked in prisons and being persecuted and will continue. And then this is when Jesus will come for second Exodus to lead Israel, who's in prisons, the Judeans, who are the true remnant that are around the world, to meet up with those people who flee Jerusalem in the wilderness to wait out the last 3.5 years to move back into the covenant land for the millennium. And so many Christians are calling all of these people satanic Jews. They're not. Some may be a large number. And as I said earlier, God is Alpha Omega. He didn't say he brought these people back to live in the land of Israel in the time of the end. He just says in Ezekiel 30, they are the people who came back into the mountains of Israel, right? But we know that God's going to fight for them, so we know some of them are the remnant of Israel, and specifically the Judeans at this point.
Wow. Wow. Now, I want to kind of go to some of the viewer questions here. The first one I will start with, and if you guys in the chat room have a question for Gary, please put it in all caps. That way I know it's just not part of the chat. Thank you. Misty Jackson asked, where does Mother Earth come in all this?
Well, Mother Earth is the female goddess aspect of polytheism, where you have a male god and a female counterpart, part of the dualist aspect of the religion. So dualism in terms of male and female, dualism in the terms of good versus evil, that is in a perpetual battle. Mother Earth is Lilith. Mother Earth is Gaia. Mother Earth is Ishtar. Mother Earth is Isis. Mother Earth is part of this pantheon of gods. Anything that has the name Mother Earth is a religious term of polytheism. If you're a secular and you don't know that, you're already talking in religious language and following religious rituals. And if you're dealing with anything with Lilith or Mother Earth, you are doing polytheist rituals. You just don't know it.
Yep. There you go. There's your answer.
and if you do know it and you choose to do that, that's your choice. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But understand it's not monotheism and it's not secularism.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great answer, Gary. Zila Hawkins asked, what do you know about Tartaria?
Oh boy. Well, it's a very, very good question, and it has resonances in various sort of ages, but it's known as a great empire that most people don't talk about, both in the not so distant past, that would include China and Russia, and also part of a civilization that was before the flood. And so I can't say I'm a significant expert on it, because I just haven't taken the time to dig into it. I know it on a superficial level, but understand Tartaria, Tartarus all has the same sort of roots, right? So this is just, again, one of those major league interesting things in history that's being suppressed for a reason. And but anyways, it has two different sort of epochs that we're talking about. I'm not sure which one that he's talking about. One is a great old empire of before the flood that had pyramids and everything else, and another one is how people were trying to reassemble that empire, as I understand it, whether or not it was Genghis Khan or whomever, but it was, one of the largest empires ever assembled.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If not the largest. So, hopefully with the chat person, if I didn't answer the question or I went in a direction they weren't asking for, maybe have them re-ask the question. But again, I'm not an expert on Tartaria, but I do know of it.
Okay. Now, I hear a lot of the especially the older one that you're talking about with the pyramids. I hear a lot of that being brought up recently. Just it seems to pique people's interest.
Yeah. So and as I say, I mean, the Bible talks when it talks about an antediluvian people and civilization, I think it's talking about the Sumerian regional civilization, but we don't know how, from a Christian perspective, we don't know how many civilizations there actually were in terms of large ones, let alone how many smaller ones. Are you still there, John? Well, I'm not sure whether John is still there or not. I'm still showing live, so I'm going to continue to speak for a bit, and maybe John will reactivate if he's been cut off. Oh, you are back. Okay.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, no problem. I just wasn't sure whether or not you were still there. What was the question again?
Okay, it says Mr. Mensa asks, question, are we due for a reset? Is that biblical?
No, the question before that, because I just lost my train of thought. So, yeah.
Okay, asking about Tartaria. What do you know about Tartaria?
Just after that.
I think you asked, you didn't know which one he was speaking of, the one with the older one with the pyramids.
We were talking about number of civilizations. That's what it was. So the Bible shows one, but But in the accounts in other religions and mythologies and history, there's as few as 4 and as many as 9. And so Tartaria fits in there somewhere. Generally, it doesn't fit within the 7, which is why 9 gets to be more the number people are starting to gravitate to, at least in recent years. So I would say it was probably part of the 9.
Okay. Now, Mr. Mensa asked, are we due for a reset? And do you know if this is biblical, or I think they're talking about like a global reset, economically, maybe?
Generally, when people are saying a reset, that's when you have an apocalypse and there's a few survivors and it starts all over again, just as we had with the flood and just as in polytheism. You have that as a constant cycle of time, just as 2012 begins that age where you would have a reset. So I'm thinking that might be what they're asking, but they could be talking smaller too. And that's what the end time and the New Age movement are both talking about from the same perspective, right? So from a New Age perspective, this is going to be the age after this destruction by fire or apocalypse by fire. Then we're going to have this new age, or this 1,000 years, where humans are going to evolve into godhoods in the physical world, and off we go. We have a similar thing in the Bible where you have the end time, where you have an apocalypse by fire, and then you have the millennial reign by Jesus, and then we go off into eternity after that with a new heavens and a new earth. So nothing ends, but it's a reset, right? Just as there has been the apocalypse of water before, there was that reset, and there's apocalypses that go back at certain times. So in that sense, yes, we're going to have that reset. If we're talking about an economic reset, I think we're going to require a economic collapse to bring on the end time. And so that's going to be one of the triggers that makes things happen very quickly.
Absolutely. I think that's already underway. I don't know if the governments are going to pick back up. I think that this has started probably back in 2008, and it's people think things happen instantly, which kind of brings me to just a personal question. I've asked you about it before, but I kind of want people to hear your opinion on it in case they haven't heard. The Revelations 12 sign, many people believe, took place September 23rd, 2017.
Yep.
We also believe that these so-called elites are trying to create, like what you were saying, a false timeline, like a false, end times. What do you think about that sign, and where do you think we're at?
Well, first of all, that was an astrology sign using astronomy. And astrology is one of the corrupted sciences that comes out of astronomy. It's part of what the Magi do. It's part of that whole mystical side, and it's part of leading people away from God. Astrology is so that you put your faith in the stars or in other gods and not in the true God of the universe. So from a Christian perspective, I would not look for astrology for any of the signs. Now, beyond that, we certainly haven't had a rapture yet, which a lot of people are using that as a sign for rapture. And so that hasn't happened yet. As I pointed out earlier in the show, that Revelation 12 happens at 3.5 years left in the last 7 years. And we know that because God is going to protect the fleeing people from Judea at the 3.5 year point for about 3.5 years, or until Armageddon's completed. Okay, so we haven't had the Gog War. We haven't received world government. We don't have a universal religion. We don't have we don't have a wing on the temple set up for the sacrifice to happen that's been going on for 3.5 years. I have a different approach than a lot of people do when it comes to prophecy, which some people find frustrating, I suppose. But my approach is quite simple, is I believe the Bible is literal, and you define everything within the Bible.
Yep.
So all the allegories look for prehistory, and that's why you need to understand prehistory to understand prophecy. I believe the Bible is linear. It begins in Genesis, it ends in Revelations, and it's a story that moves forward. And Revelation is linear. It begins in verse 1 and ends at the end. And if you read it, it is linear. I believe that if you're
Absolutely.
going to understand prophecy or the doctrines in the Bible, you need to put all of those verses together and let that tell the story, because then it will be in sync, and not leave out ones that are inconvenient or don't subscribe to a preconceived conclusion. Just let the story, once you have all of those verses put together, tell. I know that's hard to do. And then the last thing I like to do is I like to arrange all prophecy, in particular, as we talk about Revelation 12, around what Jesus said, and not vice versa. Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. He is the word, and he is the authority. And Jesus, when he talks in Matthew or Mark or Luke, as he gives the signs of the end of the time, he gives you the chronology. And the chronology that is there tells you when Judea is going to flee, which is the 3.5-year point of the last 7 years at the abomination, as what is talked about in Daniel, which is what is being talked in Revelation 12, and clearly we're not there. And so if you follow those rules, people can't come at you and just leave things out and say, well, that's it. And all that's going to happen is that people are going to be led astray or turned off because of false predictions. So we want to be very, very sure. And we're going to have many false prophets. And so we just can't point at any particular one and say, that's the false prophet. They may be a false prophet. We're going to have many antichrists before the actual one actually succeeds to being crowned in the temple. And Gog, which is part of World War III that we talked about before, just before the midpoint, as part of the Gog-Magog war in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and Joel 1 and 2 and Revelation 9. If you take that back to Greek, it also has a secondary meaning that says a term for Antichrist. So this Gog leader that's going to lead that World War III will be an Antichrist type figure as well, by how I understand the greater meaning of Gog, and as being descended from giants, or a demon that's going to possess a body or be given a transhuman body to lead the armies, and also as being a viable Antichrist option, but will not be the true Antichrist.
Wow. Absolutely. That's a great answer. I got time for one or two more questions. I don't want to keep you over the time period here. Somebody asked about Nibiru, Planet X. Is that wormwood? What do you believe about that?
Well, a lot of people believe it's wormwood. I'm not dead set against that it's going to be wormwood, but wormwood is described as a star. It happens early on, and it's not an event that destroys the whole earth. It's part of the ramping up of the judgments. And I think if it's a planet that is coming too close, that's an event that's going to destroy the whole earth, right? And clearly the whole earth is going to be destroyed, because we're going to have the millennium until we get a new heavens and new earth 1,000 years after Armageddon. I also understand that Nibiru in the ancient alien mythos and some other lines of thought is the 12th or 13th planet, I can't remember which one, that is coming back into range, that has the Anunnaki. I don't think the angels have to have a planet to get here.
No.
So I'm clearly not dismissing it as wormwood right out of the hat, right? But I'm not convinced that it's wormwood. I don't know whether people are familiar with it or not, but I believe we're going to have a lot of nuclear events in the end time, and we had one significant one in the 80s in the Ukraine at Chernobyl, which people may be familiar with that name, Chernobyl. What's interesting about Chernobyl is that's Ukrainian for wormwood.
Ooh, wow.
And I want, and again, this is just connecting dots, and I don't have anything else to sort of connect it. But I wonder whether or not whatever the star is that is going to crash into the Earth is going to somehow disable nuclear plants or be in a nuclear attack that is like wormwood. Just a random thought on that. But it is going to be a significant event, whatever wormwood is. But I think if we're looking for a planet, I'm very concerned that we're falling into the polytheist perspective, which is always a deception for us, and will discredit Christians and will deceive people to not be expecting the end time until it's too late to be saved.
Yeah. Okay. I will say, though, one thing for Nibiru, it's supposed to orbit a star, Nemesis. So, I mean, there's a star in that scenario. So, I mean, I'm not sure on if it's a deception or what the nature of it is, if it's the dragon. But you see it mentioned in the Colburn Bible as well. And in my opinion, the Colburn is the inversion of our Bible. You know, it's told by the Egyptians.
Yep. And just look at the name Nemesis. That's the arch rival, right? That's the equal opposing force, right? So if Nibiru is the good or Nibiru is the evil, that means the Nemesis star is the opposite. That's a dualistic Gnostic concept. So again, another reason to be aware of it.
Absolutely. Oh, I love how you just you're honest, man, and you just give a great perspective on a lot of these things. And I think a lot of people aren't giving these point of views right now, and it's very very important that we do. At least in my opinion, make sure that everything is in line with the Holy Bible. One person asked, "What are the 7 sacred sciences? What are they?"
Well, you would know them as the 7 liberal arts today, right? So, I mean, you got arithmetic in there, obviously. You've got geometry that's in there. You've got rhetoric that's in there. You've got grammar that's in there. So those are, they're not these exotic sort of disciplines. They're just separated into specific disciplines to develop them properly. So, I think that's the simple answer. So, and I name them all in the book. And again, there's nothing magical about what those disciplines are. It's just what they did with the knowledge. And when we were talking about knowledge earlier, I'm not against knowledge by any stretch of the imagination. Knowledge is neither good nor evil. It's how it's applied.
Yeah. Absolutely. Gary, we're close to a couple minutes out here. I do want to, give you the opportunity. Is there anything you want to, plug or tell people where they can find your book, what you're working on, just for the people who haven't got it yet or aren't familiar?
Yeah. So, I've been working on a online summit. That should be going up in the next day or two. It's called the Last Warriors Summit. So it's like an online prophecy conference. And so I have a 2-hour presentation split into 30 minutes of the organizational structure to the end time conspiracy. And I take that back all the way to the 7 sciences and antediluvian times, how it crosses the flood and how it's organizing to bring about the end time. And there's a whole host of other speakers in there that there'll probably be 12 or 15, and it's $100 for people to do. So they save a lot of money because they don't have to go to a conference, but they can access this online conference and just hear a lot of wonderful information. So I've been working on that. That's the Last Days Warrior Summit, and you can click from over on that. You can either Google it or you can go to my Facebook page or Twitter site and click on it. I've got the advertisement up there for it if you're interested. You can get a hold of me either through Facebook under Gary Wayne or through Twitter at Gary Wayne 63. or you can contact me through my website as well, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis6, the number 6conspiracy.com. And I've got a generous excerpt on all of my chapters on the website, so you can get a good feel for the book. You can get a signed copy through the website, or you can click over for the Kindle copy from the website, over to barnesandnoble.com, over to amazon.com. And it's also available through most retailers. So if it's not on the shelf, it's distributed by Bookmasters, and they can order it in if they wanted to support their local retailer. And most online retailers have the book in stock as well.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you would just want to tell people as far as this kind of confusing deception that we see going on right now, as far as what advice you would give those who believe in Jesus Christ?
It's going to get worse. There's going to be more confusion, and there's going to be more deception, and even so that even the elect will be deceived, if that were possible, as Matthew describes. Yep. And so expect more. The only way not to be deceived is to start on a process to understand prophecy yourself, and to read it, to log it, to understand it, and not be fooled by what's going to be coming, because the deceptions are going to be things we can't even imagine. Yeah. And so even when things get that bad, that it's going to be hard to tell truth from fact, we need to stick with what we know is in the Bible. Otherwise, we're going to be deceived. So that would be my advice, is to understand that this has to take place. This is what must take place, and that we need to endure through it. And your only way to endure through it is to be armed spiritually and understand what's in the Bible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to thank you, Gary, for coming on, man. Every time you come here, it's amazing the knowledge you drop, and you're a really nice guy, and you're so generous with your time, and you do a ton of these things. So I absolutely appreciate it. And I want to thank you, man. So,
well, thank you for having me, and hopefully we've given some good information to the audience and a lot of things to think about. And that's really what it's all about. Is I'm trying to raise curiosity and get people to ask more critical questions as to what's going on and how do I sort through this stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can go ahead and disconnect if you want, Gary. I'm just going to give them my website here. I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight here in the chat. If you haven't already, please go to www.spreaker.com/user/bestdampodcast. Also, send your emails, your questions, all that good stuff to therealbestdampodcast@gmail.com. And please support the channel, support the work by going to www.paypal.me/bestdampodcast or patreon.com/bestdampodcast. I'm going to shout a few of you guys out before we get out of here. Stephanie McGinnis, hey girl. Tara Martin, Anastasia Butler, Mr. Mensa, Emily Shane, JC, Kitten T, Tara Martin, Damo. I'm going to shout you out. All you guys that moderate, you're wonderful. You guys did a really good job tonight too. It seemed very, very respectful. So that's super cool always. Zila Hawkins, Shirley Graham. Hey Shirley, what's going on? Yeah. So I appreciate all you guys. I just want to thank you guys for joining. Tomorrow night, I'll have 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I don't know if you guys have seen it or not, but I was a guest on Real Talk with the Cummings last week. I was on their channel, and it was good. I had fun and all that, but they're going to be on this channel tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I got another guest coming up, but I can't think of it. So I'm sure I'll let you know. So I thank all you guys for joining me tonight. And, remember, Jesus is the truth, the way, and the life. God bless you guys. I love you. And I'll see you next time.